Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Native Americans have a unique relationship with punk music. Alaska Native researcher Thomas Michael Swensen explores that relationship in his new book, Where Next, Columbus? A Native Punk Mixtape. He examines obscure Native punk music and art from around the world. We'll speak with him, and we'll also talk to Romeo Void singer and Cowlitz tribal citizen Debora Iyall about a new collection of live recordings from her band. That's all coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. A federal watchdog says some guidelines meant to improve the response to missing and murdered Indigenous people are falling short of federal requirements. That's according to an audit from the Justice Department's Office of Inspector General. The watchdog reviewed guidelines from 49 U.S. attorneys' districts developed under Savannah's Act. The law was passed in 2020 to improve coordination between tribal, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies responding to cases of missing and murdered Indigenous people. The Inspector General found guidelines from 10 of the 49 districts did not fully meet requirements under the law. 7 were missing at least one of 6 requirement sections, while 8 were not adequately tailored to circumstances within their individual districts. The audit also found staffing shortages within the Justice Department's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Regional Outreach Program. As of February, 4 of the program's 10 positions were vacant. The Inspector General says vacancies and staff turnover have slowed the program's progress. The office made 3 recommendations, including addressing staffing shortages and bringing district guidelines into compliance. The Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys agreed with all 3. Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan has won the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. The Associated Press called the race for Flanagan Tuesday night. Flanagan is a citizen of the White Earth Nation. She defeated U.S. Representative Angie Craig in the Democratic Farmer-Labor primary. The win puts Flanagan one step closer to making history. If elected in November, she would become the first Native American woman to serve in the U.S. Senate. Flanagan has served as Minnesota's lieutenant governor since 2019 and is the highest-ranking Native woman elected to executive office in the United States. During her campaign, Flanagan focused on issues including healthcare and affordability. She also campaigned against corporate influence in politics. She is running for the seat held by Senator Tina Smith, who is not seeking re-election. Flanagan will face Republican Michelle Tafoya in the November general election. The Associated Press also called that primary for Tafoya Tuesday night. The former NFL sideline reporter won a crowded Republican race. A win for Flanagan in November would mark a historic first for Native women in the U.S. Senate. Congressional Democrats have opened an investigation into a uranium mining company for alleged insider trading. KNAU's Chris Clements has more.
Energy Fuels Resources CEO Ross Bapu bought 74,000 shares of stock in his own company on July 7th. Chairman of the board, Bruce Hansen, bought 4,000 shares on July 8th. 5 days after that, President Donald Trump announced a 90% cut to Bears Ears National Monument. That timing is suspicious, says 2 Democrats on the House Natural Resources Committee. Representatives Jared Huffman of California and Maxine Dexter of Oregon allege the Trump administration may have tipped the company off about the reduction before it happened. The company owns the only conventional uranium mill in the U.S., and there's a lot of uranium underneath Bears Ears, which is now free from a moratorium on new mining claims. The Congresspeople say the company stood to benefit from the Bears Ears reduction, but in an emailed statement to KNAU, Energy Fuels denied the allegations and said it was unaware of any evidence supporting the representatives' claims. For KNAU, I'm Chris Clements in Flagstaff.
And I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by the Colorado Plateau Foundation, supporting Native-led initiatives protecting plateau lands, waters, and cultures by building networks, community, and organizational capacity. Grant proposals accepted only through August 14th at coloradoplateaufoundation.org.
Support by Sonosky Chambers Law, championing tribal sovereignty and Native American rights since 1976. From opioids litigation to treaty rights to tribal self-governance. With offices in Washington, D.C., New Mexico, California, and Alaska. Sonosky Chambers Law.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. The iconic new wave band Romeo Void is out with a new collection of live recordings from the peak of their popularity and creative powers in the 1980s. The album, Live from 81 to 85, features raw and dynamic concert performances of the band's signature songs like A Girl Is in Trouble and Never Say Never. Cowlitz citizen Debora Iyall is the lead singer of the band, and we'll speak with her this hour about the album and her other creative work. But first, we're going to speak with Alaska Native scholar Thomas Michael Swensen, whose new book examines Native Americans' relationship with punk music and its subculture. The book, Where Next Columbus, a Native Punk Mixtape, is now out from the University of Oklahoma Press. We'll hear about the book and hear some of his favorite Native punk songs along the way, and listeners, as always, can join the conversation as well. Share a comment or ask a question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That is also 1-800-99-NATIVE, or leave a comment on our website, nativeamericacalling.com, or any of our social media pages such as Facebook and Instagram. Joining us now on Zoom from Bogota, Colombia, is Thomas Michael Swensen. He is an associate professor at the University of Utah and author of Where Next Columbus, a Native Punk Mixtape. He is a citizen of the Tonganak Native Village just across from Kodiak, Alaska. Hello, Thomas, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hey, Sean. Thank you very much. I'm a long-time listener, so it's an honor to be on your show today, and I'm really thrilled to be speaking with you and to talk about this book. Thank you.
Absolutely. Where Next Columbus? It's a really catchy title. It examines the confluence of Native Americans and punk music, and this is not a confluence, I don't think, that is talked about every day. What sparked your interest in exploring this relationship?
Well, I guess, we start with this question, where next Columbus is really what's behind this book. Columbus arrives to the Americas, and then for 500 years, you got people coming along saying, essentially, what's next? Where can we go? What else can we take? And in fact, the Smithsonian used this exact same question in 1992 to connect the 500 years since Columbus's voyage to the future of space exploration with an exhibit of the same name. And it had nothing to do with colonial history or Native people, and it was about space exploration specifically. And I found that fascinating, but also, a little disturbing, because if you're Native, you want to ask different questions, right? Before we're talking about going to Mars, we should be asked, well, what happened here? What did that first voyage actually produce? And what are the conditions now on the ground? And so, I started exploring Crass, which is a British anarchist punk band. And they had already asked this question, Where Next Columbus, with a song, but they were asking it in a completely different way. Their question wasn't really about Columbus. It was about people giving their minds over to other charismatic leaders and to ideologies. And that's where Native sovereignty and punk started coming together for me, because Native punk isn't a particular musical sound. It's a way of thinking and acting about who gets to make decisions about your life and who gets to tell you what you're supposed to do. Native punk is loud. It's really funny. It could be creative and maybe deliberately obnoxious, but underneath it's very serious. There's this question here: who gets to decide? And, for all of us, we understand that as a sovereignty question, right? So native punk isn't simply about playing music. It's a way of understanding native people as contemporary cultural producers rather than objects of history. And I think the book is important because native people still too often are put into two different boxes. We're either presented as people from the past in museums and photographs, or we're presented as through this very narrow political vocabulary, right? As victims or activists or people making claims. And those things are all part of history, but they're not the whole history. And punk gave me a way to think about native people as making culture, people making noise, making jokes, making art. And that's really what I mean by native punk. It's not arguing that there's one particular kind of sound or one particular way of thinking, because there isn't. And so I don't know if I really want to put it in a jar and kind of label it that way. That's probably like the least punk thing we could do.
Right.
I think native punk in a way is of making noise from where you are, I guess. You're right. Sometimes that noise is angry, and perhaps pointed at the U.S. government, sometimes at corporations and colonialism, and sometimes perhaps most importantly at your own community. And that's part of what it's interesting to me, that punk isn't some kind of a liberatory device, in an automatic sense. And there are tensions inside both of those kinds of places, right? Punk and Native America. But if you put them together, and you get this really interesting conversation between sovereignty and self-determination, and that checks as native to me, Sean.
Yeah.
So thank you.
It does, Thomas. And one of the themes that really resonated with me throughout the book is that, of course, you explain how punk has this focus on anti-establishment and rebelliousness, social alienation, and the whole do-it-yourself type of mindset. Mm-hmm. And some of the lyrics, the attitudes they reject, like commercialism or authority. And what you encourage Native readers to do with your book is to apply those same principles to our own tribal identities as well. And I don't hear a lot of other people expressing themselves in that way, at least not on our show. And I think that's really an innovative approach that you took, and just really it got me really thinking about my own values, my own life, all through this lens of punk, which I really want to compliment you, just how innovative I think this book is. Now, the book begins, the first two chapters, you talk about the punk scene in Alaska and having grown up there and what you saw emerging. Tell us more about that introduction of yours into punk music there in Alaska.
Well, thank you. My connection to punk actually starts in Kodiak. And I grew up there, and I was a kid who got very interested in all of it. And I remember finding the Ramones' Rocket to Russia. And there was something about that record that suddenly made punk feel like it belonged to my life. And Kodiak is this little island in Alaska, not too far from Russia. And it has this, unique, perhaps even strange Russian history. And I remember looking at the back of the Rocket to Russia album, and maybe your listeners can check this out, and realizing that the world the Ramones were singing about wasn't as far away as I thought, And I went through a pretty strange adolescence, and I ended up living with kin in villages all around the Kodiak archipelago, and even working on a remote fish camp, for $1 a day. And I was listening to this music constantly while I was doing this. And I eventually saved enough money to buy like a little set of portable speakers that I could plug my Walkman into. And I learned how, we all did, to kind of fix cassette tapes, right? And with like some tape, like some Scotch tape and like a big ballpoint pen. And so I was listening to music all the time. So by the time I got to Anchorage, my mother was released from incarceration. I moved to the mainland. Punk wasn't some kind of intellectual position for me. It was something that I carried around with me. And my friends and I eventually pooled what we called the permanent fund checks, right? That the Alaska state government would send out to residents. And we pooled our money and bought a 4-track recorder. And we started making our own music and making our own tapes. And we were literally splicing and cutting things together. And that's probably why I remember the Anchorage scene the way I do. It wasn't this grand political experience where everyone was standing around explaining Native identity or punk philosophy. It was just people making things, and some of it was terrible, to tell you the truth, and some of it was super funny. And some of it was crude. I had a great time, and there were Native kids in the scene doing things you didn't necessarily have that didn't necessarily have anything to do with anybody's idea of what Native culture was supposed to look like. And that became really important to me later as I grew up, because I realized that punk had given me something that I didn't quite have a name for at the time. And it gave me a place to be as a person rather than kind of a representative of some culture. And then it hit me with this line that, thinking about punk not being rebellion, but like actually being comfort. And I think that's a way to think about punk. Think about it like, someone with, putting some earphones in their ears or looking at a zine or something and finding music or art as medicine instead of poison, And I think that's really central to Native punk. So thank you, Sean.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break here in just a moment, Thomas. And when we come back, we're going to hear the first song that you write about in the book. But we do have to take a short break. And going back to your upbringing in Alaska and talking about punk music and the whole punk scene, what really struck me as well is how the atomic testing and the whole connection to the nuclear age and how punk was kind of drawn into that as well. And some of the themes, again, just some really, really interesting ideas, some really interesting history that we don't probably get every day, but it's definitely good history, good information to know about. Regardless of whether or not you're into punk music or you have a background listening to punk music, this book just has a lot to offer readers of all perspectives. And again, the title is Where Next Columbus, a Native Punk Mixtape. So we will take a short break. We'll come back and listen to some music, listen to some punk music, and we'll talk more with Thomas Michael Swensen. And we've got the phone lines open, of course, for listeners who would like to join us. Maybe you grew up in Alaska, too, and you were hanging around some of these areas. There's a lot of information about the punk scene in Anchorage back in the early 80s. Maybe you were part of it yourself. Give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. The 3-day Arts and Music Festival put on by the Pewaukee Pueblo in New Mexico gets underway this weekend. We'll get a preview of the Pathways Indigenous Arts Festival that brings in some 350 artists along with live music and an extensive celebration of Native film and television. We'll be live at the Buffalo Thunder Resort and Casino on the next Native America Calling.
Grand Canyon Conservancy fosters visitor engagement with the landscape through learning, discovery, and stewardship. The Grand Canyon Conservancy Field Institute provides immersive and educational adventures designed in partnership with Grand Canyon National Park, including day hikes for the family, once-in-a-lifetime backpacking trips, and art classes with expert instructors. More at grandcanyon.org. Grand Canyon Conservancy supports this show.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. We will continue now with our conversation with Tongahanook Native Village citizen and author Thomas Michael Swensen. We're talking about his latest book, Where Next Columbus, that examines the intersection of Native Americans and punk music. Later in the hour, we'll speak with Romeo Void singer Debora Iyall. You can also comment or ask a question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That is also 1-800-99-NATIVE, or comment on our social media pages like Facebook and Instagram. Thomas, let's hear the first song you write about in the book. It's titled Back in That Time by Tlingit artist Yatsin. It features Yupik and Inuit artist Gachung rapping in Yupik. Let's take a listen first, then we'll talk. That was the song Back in That Time by Yatsin featuring Gachung. And Thomas, listeners might wonder what makes that a punk song. How does it fit into the punk category? Explain that for us.
Well, I think that, of course, punk is about independence. And one thing I think is that with this song, nobody comes on and says, here's what, Yupik or Tlingit or Yunungan culture means. Nobody's giving you a little tour of native symbolism in this song. And nobody's telling you what you're supposed to think about what this music means. And that, there's also a video for this song that was directed by Dene artist and composer Raven Chacon. And for me, that's really where I start with this kind of bringing this song and this video together. And now, of course, the song has this kind of minor step, right? It's this kind of looped minor step, and published by Nicholas Galanin in his musical project Yatsin, which is a band that is signed to Sub Pop Records, which is the record label that put out Nirvana, right? It's based in Seattle, and I think that's really important because museums have always been the place of showcasing Native culture, and here's a place where Native artists are coming out, who are producing music that's outside of the museum. There's nobody saying, this is how we're going to catalog or classify or study this song. And I think that's extremely punk. And in the same way you wouldn't expect queercore music to sound exactly like other kinds of punk, the sound that Yatsin is producing here is saying, this is not sound that you expect from Native America. This is not what I guess scholar Phil Deloria would call the sound of Indian, right? In quotes there, right? Okay. There's no sound that people have, there's a sound that people have learned to expect, right? And there's an image too, and that in this, that Native people are supposed to be kind of traditional. And here we have sounds that, that sound kind of foreign to us in that traditional way, and yet here is a man speaking Yupik, talking about the past and talking about this kind of cultural nationalism that exists between this kind of mythic past or this distant past and the present. So that's a really great position to put Native culture in that way outside of the museum. So I guess that's my answer there, my friend. Thank you.
You bet, Thomas. Let's hear another song that you feature in the book. This one is titled Baby Razor Blade. It's by Friends of Cesar Romero. It's a one-man pop-punk band from Northern Cheyenne and Lakota artist J. Waylon Miller. Quickly, Thomas, what can you tell us about Miller before we play the track?
Oh, Where can you start really with this writer, this musician, over the course of his life? I don't know how. I mean, I really encourage your listeners to get on Bandcamp and type Friends of Cesar Romero, and also another band he headed, which was called the Red Men. And unfortunately, the same month that my book came out in April, we lost Johnny Miller. So he passed away in Rapid City, I think just at the beginning of April, unfortunately. And the world has really lost an incredible artist. So this band that Friends of Cesar Romero, is a pop punk band that it's very joyful. And I encourage you. Let's take a listen here now.
That was the song Baby Razor Blade by Friends of Cesar Romero. And we have Thomas Michael Swensen on the line talking about his book, Where Next Columbus. This is one of the tracks that is featured and written about in his book. And Thomas, another really compelling point you make in the book is this whole idea that punk did not travel, it did not evolve in a linear direction. And you use the phrase west to the rest, like I think a lot of us might think a lot, but really it emerged in many places. And this is a good example because, of course, the song we just heard, it's by an artist who was Northern Cheyenne and Lakota. And we talked earlier about Alaska, but you write about other native punk artists in the Southwest, in South Dakota. You even write about native punk in Cuba and Mexico City. And tell us a little bit more about how the music evolves, again, and not in this west to the rest mindset that a lot of people might think of.
Oh, great question. I wanted to move around because I didn't want to write a book that suggested, right, that there was one native experience and therefore like one native punk. I wanted to map it though. I felt like this book focuses native sovereignty first, right? That in the Americas, how can we look at punk through native sovereignty? And so one of the traps is that when you fall into talk about Native America, you start saying native people as though there's one people, right? One history, one culture. But Native America, as you all know, all your listeners know, is enormous and incredibly diverse. So I wanted the book to move around geographically. I begin in Alaska because that's where I'm from. And also because Alaska completely complicates that usual story that people talk about when they talk about Native American history and American history. And Alaska is usually described as the last frontier, which is a pretty loaded way of describing a place where Native nations have been living for thousands of years, of course. And Alaska has a Russian colonial history, a British exploration, American expansion, the transfer of Russia to the United States. We went through statehood, the Cold War, which is so imperative to that chapter that I write about Alaska punk and its relationship to the Cold War and atomic testing in Amchitka. Amchitka was the largest detonation of its kind, at the time, and that was only 6 weeks before the passage of the Alaska Natives Claims Settlement Act in 1971. So there's a tremendous amount of history here, and punk shows up in that environment. If you read through that chapter, you can see how punk is responding to all of these things. So rather than just saying punk traveled from London to America, eventually found its way to Alaska, I wanted to say that, ask what happens when people in Alaska or other places encounter punk within this particular history. So then I moved to the Southwest because that's another completely different native and colonial landscape. You have different nations, different histories. You've got Spain, Mexico, the United States, these kinds of relationships to land. And then, as we were just talking about here, we moved to Lakota country and Northern Cheyenne country. And that gives another set of circumstances there that you're dealing with, a very particular kind of Plains history. In fact, that chapter where I speak about Friends of Cesar Romero, we call it the Plains solutions, right? How do Plains Native people kind of find that solution to pop punk? Because pop punk can get a bad rap, right? I mean, so like how do they deal with that? And so I find that music doesn't exist in a vacuum, and punk is being made by people who inherited these kind of particular histories. So I wanted to push the book then outside of the United States altogether, which is how I ended up in Cuba and Latin America. And the history of indigenous peoples extends across these borders that European and American governments eventually drew up. So I wanted to say, hey, how can Native America map punk without without having these kinds of imposed borders trap us in? And so recently I saw an indigenous Mexican comedian named Carlos Vallarta perform in Bogota, Colombia, and truly one of the best stand-up performers alive. And he is also so incredibly punk. In the auditorium before the show, he had someone selling tour hoodies out of an old suitcase right there in the auditorium. And so midway through the show, he starts telling the story about how his son's school was doing a Columbus reenactment. Okay, so they made all these paper. He starts talking about they make all these paper mache ships, and they cut out paper costumes for everyone to wear. But the punchline of the joke was like, not that he was like totally upset about the reenactment. It's just that his teachers didn't pick his son to play one of the native characters. And so, a great story and incredibly punk, right? So he's pacing around telling this long story, and he's like, and my son wasn't chosen to represent this. And so, this kind of punk questioning is happening wherever Native people make music or make art and speak about the world they're actually living in.
All right. Well, the book again is titled Where Next? Columbus, a Native Punk Mixtape by Thomas Michael Swensen. Thomas, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been great talking with you.
Of course. Yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to listening to the show further. Thank you.
You bet. 1-800-99-NATIVE to join our conversation today. We are talking about punk music from an indigenous Native perspective, and our next guest joins us now from Raton, New Mexico. Debora Iyall, singer and lyricist for Romeo Void and Native American Music Awards Lifetime Achievement honoree. She's a citizen of the Cowlitz tribe. Debora, hello, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Well, thanks for having me. That was such an interesting discussion that you were having, and I'm in full agreement that it's migration, it's not immigration.
Well, I agree. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and it's only going to get better with you now, Debora. And let's talk about this new album. You and your band members, you went through dozens of recordings that your sound engineer made during live performances back in the early 1980s. What were you looking for when you were curating these recordings?
Well, we were looking for the most dynamic performances, and also the performances that showed our interaction, between the instruments and also between us and our sound person, because him and the sax player were really playing off a lot of the digital delay and echoplex, kind of sound things that you use live. And we just wanted to show the energy of our live shows because, you know, when you're in the studio, you capture the songs, but you don't capture that special I was there feeling.
The I was there feeling. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the album will probably appeal to Romeo Void fans. What will audiences, though, maybe newer audiences, after a half a century after some of these songs were recorded, what will they find in this album?
They'll find kind of a 20th century aesthetic, a band aesthetic, where the unit and the ensemble is like the most high. You know, the art of it was a premier concern of ours, you know, the energy of interacting with audiences. And I think a lot of people who, especially like making music during the pandemic and stuff, they were at home on their, you know, computers and stuff trying to make music and didn't have that option of going before audiences over and over and over and getting that feedback and getting that confidence when the audience is telling you we want more, you know. And so I was always up for the challenge.
All right, Debora, we're going to take a short break. We're going to come back, and when we return, we're going to hear the first song off the live album, and I'm really excited to listen to this song because it was actually recorded in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and that's the town where I grew up in. So we're going to take a listen to that song on the other side of this break, and the phone lines, of course, are still open. Let's get some calls going here. Anyone who is into punk music or has any kind of experience going to punk shows, or maybe you are a Romeo Void fan and you'd like to talk with Debora Iyall, you can do it. Just give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Again, 1-800-99-NATIVE. That stands for 1-800-996-2848. Give us a call. Join the conversation today. Let's talk about some native punk.
Tribal Development Partners, helping tribes build toward their goals through 105L leasing and essential facility development, empowering sovereignty, strengthening community. More at tribaldevpartners.com, proud supporters of this show.
Need help identifying community priorities? Kaufman & Associates' approach to evaluation is rooted in Indigenous knowledge, honoring tribal history, and sovereignty. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You are listening to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. We're speaking now with Debora Iyall from the famed new wave band Romeo Void about the new release of live recordings from 1981 to 1985. And a reminder, you can listen back to this show and all past shows of Native America Calling on our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and wherever you get your podcasts. Debora, let's hear the first song off the live album. This is titled In the Dark, and this is you and the band, and you're performing at the Second Chance venue in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1982. I remember the Second Chance very well. What can you tell us about this song and why it leads off the album?
Well, it was just always a really great opener to our set because it starts off with that, horn line, just grabbing your attention. And, it's pretty poetic and it's driving and all the things that Romeo Void was.
The band you've all been waiting for. San Francisco, California, Romeo Void.
Your breath is hard and she
That was the song In the Dark by Romeo Void off their newly released album Live 81 to 85. It was recorded at the Second Chance in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And oh, Debora, that is just so classic. I love that sound. It is so clean. And in 1982, as I shared, I grew up in Ann Arbor in 1982. I was a few years too young to go into the Second Chance, but I have an older sister, and she sure was able to go into the Second Chance. She used to hang out there. But what do you remember about crowds like that at places, like in Ann Arbor? And you also toured in Europe. And what was it like? What were some of your favorite venues?
Well, what I liked about our crowds is that they were very mixed. There would be a guy in leather and studs standing next to somebody who is just all in polka dots, and so it was like new wave, it was punk, it was gay, there are lots of women, especially because we were from the West Coast, tons of Latinos were our fans, and also we got really good airplay in Los Angeles, so we would play for these crowds that had already heard us on the radio, and it was just exciting, and I just remember thinking, when the light goes on, just make it happen.
Uh-huh.
And the guys, so one night we were doing a new song, and I was a little bit nervous about, I remember all the lyrics, because sometimes I wrote a lot of lyrics for songs. And I looked at my bass player and I said, I know most of the lyrics. You just got to go do it,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Romeo Void, very popular in the early 1980s. You had songs make the Billboard Top 40. You were on American Bandstand. You were interviewed by Dick Clark, and you had a really unique sound. And there were other new wave bands out there. But what do you think it was about your sound that connected so well with audiences in that era?
Well, I think women and people in general, men too, and gays for sure, were looking for someone to just be a little raw and unapologetic and not pleading, just speak your mind, and that's how I always felt. I liked plain speech. I liked to speak my mind, and I liked to be fearless and not be ashamed of who I was. I was a big round girl, and this was not what the pop world thought a female singer is supposed to look like. I was far away from the standard at that point for success, and yet the audiences who made us, and I always have to thank our audience for coming to us and seeking us out, and I hope it was just because they could reflect it, and see themselves in our point of view and our urge to just make, as Robbie Robertson said, making a noise in this world,
Debora, Columbia Records, they dropped the band after your 1985 tour. What did they tell you about that decision?
I don't even remember them telling us anything. I think it didn't do as well as they wanted, even though we got on Dick Clark, So it was like it didn't make sense. I think it was the marketing people. They just wanted cuter singers. We went to Black Rock, which is a great big high-rise in Manhattan, after we were halfway through our tour of the United States. We go up to whatever 30th floor, whatever all the A&R department was, and we walk out of the elevator, and plastering all the walls throughout the whole floor was Patti Smythe and Scandal. And so it was obvious, like we just weren't going to be a priority with them anymore. So I guess they didn't hear the hot singles, even though Girl in Trouble is, got to 32. Anyway, you can hear Casey Kasem. There's a station that I used to listen to, that played oldies, and Casey Kasem, the week that we were number 32. It's so fun to hear him, announce, and now Romeo Boy.
Wow. Yeah, these memories are just so cool. And, thinking about it too, that time period was kind of when things were really transitioning to like MTV and the music video scene. So it kind of, I can kind of see where maybe these labels were thinking, but geez, I mean, the sound, it's all about the sound. And you guys had such a great sound. And you wrote the lyrics for almost every Romeo Void song, and they're known for being pointed and edgy. Tell me more about that songwriting process you had back then and how you look back on your creative process.
Well, I just kind of kept a lot of notes, about how I was feeling, and I like to write poetry. I had a background in poetry already. I quit high school and started taking poetry classes at the local college where I lived in Fresno, California, and I was just determined to speak my mind. I'd seen Nikki Giovanni. I don't know if you know her as a poet, but she was a role model for me as well. And I don't know. We were ready to chronicle our time, And I always really loved, like Pablo Neruda as well, and more of a kind of like psychedelic stream of consciousness sort of writing, beat era poets, informed my writing style as well. And of course, Patti Smith and Jim Carroll, so I was just ready to go for it. I don't know. I guess we didn't have anything to lose,
Now, the band grew from the San Francisco Bay Area music scene, and you now live in a small town in northern New Mexico. You're in Raton. Debora, how did your journey take you to where you are now?
Well, I have to blame my husband because he grew up on the Front Range up in Monument, Colorado. And so when we, knew I was going to be retiring from teaching high school art out in California, we started looking for real estate along the Front Range. And, the closer we got to New Mexico, the kind of more affordable it was. And he remembers when he was in high school going through Raton when he was playing soccer to play down in Albuquerque. And he always just loved the town. So we started looking on Zillow, and we found, wow, we can afford this. And, he was an audio engineer. And so, we're going to have him have a studio, and I would just retire from teaching, and who knows what I'd get up to. But, I kind of kept singing and doing art and all that. So I have to.
Okay.
I would have never found this place without him.
Debora, we're going to play another track, but before we do that, I want to ask you one more question. I know you're going to be performing in Seattle next month at the Daybreak Star Cultural Center. Tell us more about that upcoming concert and what performing is like for you now.
I love performing. I love singing. I'm an avid swimmer. That's like my fitness thing. And I swim about 5 or 6 days a week. I swim and sing in the pool, so I don't know. It's just the way my breath wants to go is through song, and so I still really enjoy performing. Daybreak Star, the curator at the gallery there, Sacred Circle, he went to art school at the same time I did in San Francisco. And so we met each other just real casually, acquaintances all that way back in time. And he always wanted to somehow get me to Daybreak Star. And right now they're kind of expanding and trying to expand more public consciousness of who they are and what they do. They have social programs. They have a preschool. They have a radio. And he just thought, let's get somebody from the 20th century culture up here and start off a concert series. And they're hoping to have one every year, like an Indian summer concert series at the end of September, and highlight other Native musicians. He hasn't announced all the other acts yet. I'm sure, he's kind of negotiating, but there will be craftspeople there and food trucks and all that kind of stuff too. And it's going to be free. It's at Discovery Park, which is where the Cultural Center is, kind of on the edge of the bluffs in Seattle.
All right. Sounds great. Debora, we have time for one more song, and this is the song Never Say Never. It's one of your most famous songs. Let's take a listen.
All right.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you what. If you don't remember that song from the 1980s, I think you were living under a rock. And Debora, such a great song. What is it about this song and its enduring appeal after all these years?
I don't know. It's just such a banger, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm super proud of it. You know, I just always felt like, you know, when I first started seeing punk bands in San Francisco, the Avengers were one of my, you know, I saw that band and saw Penelope singing and I thought, she's got something to say. Well, you know what? So do I. I got something to say, you know, and it just went from there.
Now, it shows up in playlists still. It's a hit in movie soundtracks. It's just got such a unique sound. And do you still get a lot of requests for it and a lot of people asking you to play it or sing it?
Well, we're going to do it at Daybreak Start, you know, at the Indian Summer Concert. So, yeah.
All righty.
I'll do it. I'm proud of it, you know, like, you know, it's like Lena Horne, you know, or any of the old, you know, standard singers, you know, you got to, you know, dance with the one who brung you, you know, and that's what Never Say Never is.
Well, Debora, it's been great having you on the show today, listening to some of your music, talking with you. I just want to wish you so much success going forward and just keep inspiring, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And with that, we're going to have to wrap up our conversation with our guest. But before we do, I want to say thank you again to Debora Iyall and also Thomas Michael Swensen for joining us today. And please tune in again tomorrow. We will head to the Pueblo of Pewaukee in northern New Mexico to hear from artists and organizers with the Pathways Indigenous Arts Festival. It'll be an on-site show broadcast there from the Pueblo of Pewaukee, so don't miss it. And until then, I'm your host, Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Who protects Indian country? Ameren does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerant helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerant is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerant.com. That's AMERIND.com. Trickster Cultural Center hosts the 12th Annual National Gathering of American Indian Veterans to honor veterans and military personnel of all cultures, eras, and branches in a Native way. Trickster Cultural Center's National Gathering of American Indian Veterans is open to the public at no charge Saturday, August 22nd in Schaumburg, Illinois. More at tricksterculturalcenter.org/national-gathering-2026. Trickster Cultural Center supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.